Okay.
Well, I think that we're live. I'm just checking. Yes, we are live. With these technological things, you never really know. Good evening. Thank you for everyone who's joining us tonight to our panel discussion of On the Edge exhibition. As many of you might know, I'm one of the co-curators of On the Edge exhibition. That's an exhibition by members of the Royal Society of Sculptors. We've been more than a year together working around a quote from a Ukrainian poet. And the quote says as follows: "Every heart in our beloved country is on the edge. And to be honest, I'm on the edge too. I feel sorry for the ones at the center, but really I'm especially sorry for the ones in the camp towers watching the frosted distance." So this quote has inspired us to do an exhibition that's reflecting about living on the edge and like how relevant is art in moments where we faced like things as catastrophic as climate change and the war with Ukraine. And I guess it's about reflecting like what can we do as artists, because when the war started we were feeling somehow anxious and thinking like, well, we're having quite a comfortable life in London or where some of the artists are based, and how can we really support artists that are actually struggling? So that's how this whole idea of doing this exhibition came up. The exhibition is going to take place on Espacio Gallery. Below this link, you have some information to the Eventbrite link where you can actually access and book tickets. It's a free event. It's going to be between the 14th and 19th of March. The private view is going to be on the Thursday, 16th of March, and you're all very welcome to come. So to start this evening, I would like to introduce our guest speakers. In case I haven't given my name, I'm Tere Chat, so I'm a sculptress, and I would like to start introducing Marita and Ivor, the directors of Artists at Risk.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Pleasure to be here with you. We're actually calling in from Barcelona at the moment. We have a very nice group, large community of hosts and artists and activists here in Barcelona, and we do this in many different cities all over the world, where we build a kind of community of different organizations which we help to build and fund and create the context in which artists from around the world can come to find a new home, because they have to flee persecution, terror, war, natural disaster, but mainly forms of political persecution. Ukraine being the exception. It is a form of political persecution, but it's on a national scale by another country. So we're going to show you some images, but first I'd just like to introduce Marita Mukonen, my co-director. I'm Ivor Stodolski, but go ahead, Marita, when you first say hello.
First of all, thanks a lot, Tere and the Royal Society of Sculptors for organizing this exhibition and this panel discussion. And we are really happy that Boris Krylov is here with us, because it's always the most important thing to hear from the artist that what is really happening on the ground, like Boris is in Kiev. As Ivor said, that we are now in Barcelona. Actually, it's also as we know that the brutal Russian invasion to Ukraine started on the 24th of February. And actually, we are hosting here with our partners at the moment, Ukrainian artist Alexei Yudnikov and Sasha Denisova has written a new play, and that will be also premiered here in early March. But very shortly, what Artists at Risk does, as the name says, we work in the intersection of arts and human rights, and we started our work officially in 2013. But already before that, both of us have worked with the politically and socially engaged art practitioners. And unfortunately, the situation often for those people who stand up for democratic values, for human rights, for ecological rights, they are the ones who are prosecuted by the governments and who are in the front line. So the basic idea of Artists at Risk is to offer breathers, anything from 3 to up to 24 months, for art practitioners who are prosecuted, whose lives are threatened. In the case of Ukraine, it's war. And we will talk a little bit about how the situation was different with the solidarity shown to Ukrainian colleagues and peers, which we have never experienced actually in the history of Artists at Risk.
Right. So just to give a little bit of background to how Artists at Risk began, so Marita Mukkonen is a curator. She's directed several institutions and been leading several state and non-state institutions, including also working in ministries and in state organizations in Finland. But we have been working together for over 10 years. Artists at Risk started in about 2013, when we started working with oppositional figures from not only Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, but also then with Egypt, and people who were in revolt against the authoritarian regimes of northern Africa and the Middle East. And that's when we realized that we had to have an organization that didn't work on an ad hoc basis, just to kind of have one or two artists fleeing persecution or couldn't return from an exhibition that we had organized as curators, but that we needed a more systematic approach. And this is when we started to host artists from across the world. To kind of go fast forward to the present moment, I think it's we need to show a little bit of what happened in between, and most of our work is behind the scenes. But we have a website which we'd like to show you that does show something about the status quo approximately 1 year ago, before all the more than 500 residencies joined Artists at Risk. Here we see an image of the map of the world. And if you look here, I'm closing these application form boxes, you can see the blue markers represent hosting organizations. So we've hosted in the UK, we've hosted in all the Nordic region and across Europe, also in Tunisia, actually in India and in other parts of Africa, we've had hosting organizations. Currently, as Marita was pointing out, what we have is a very new situation, which the entire European cultural field stood up in solidarity, opened the doors, and received hundreds of residents. We've had over 500 residents from the Ukraine war-related uprisings and resistance within Russia, within Belarus, within across the region that are trying to fight this terrible dictatorship attacking peaceful country in Ukraine. Marita, maybe you could continue with from what I was saying.
So it's basically, as Igor said, that we have hosted this altogether when it comes to Ukrainian art practitioners, we have hosted some 400 artists. It's basically, we want to also know that we also have a residency network in the safer areas in Ukraine, which we are strengthening. And we are underlining also that need for Ukrainian arts and cultural practitioners, it continues. We have at the moment around 2,100 applicants from Ukraine who have applied for residencies, both outside of Ukraine and within Ukraine. So our open call to become a host for Ukrainian Artists at Risk, as well as for other art practitioners at risk, is ongoing. So that's also something, if you go to our website, it's very simple to see how to apply to become a host for artists, for colleagues, for peers who have to flee their countries or need a breather. As you see, it is also on our website that basically we have a separate call, like for Ukrainians, also ongoing for Afghan artists at risk. We have currently more than 1,500 Afghan art practitioners at risk who are still in Afghanistan or in neighboring countries. there's a crucial difference between Afghan artists at risk and with Ukrainians, because luckily Ukrainians got the visa exception and they can come to Europe. But with Afghan artists, the situation is not like that. The biggest obstacle is that they are not entitled to human rights-based visas, or they don't get visas. So we are calling this solidarity, which was shown to Ukrainian artists for all the art practitioners at risk, that EU area can do it if there's a political will to do so. So it's not kind of a choice between one or another, but it's artists from Ukraine, from Afghanistan, from Kurdistan, from Iran, from many regions who also need breathers and who need safe places to continue their work as artists.
Okay, so and since we want to keep it relatively short, we should also just kind of inform you of the fact, since you're in Ukraine, Boris, and others that might be interested, we're aware that Ukraine is facing, like many other countries, the very difficult choice for artists is, should I stay and fight the fight where I am? That is, continue to oppose those forces which are, destroying culture and art and my society, or should I go and bring my family to safety and find a way in which I can fight from abroad? And we're trying to mitigate that issue by building safe havens within the regions. And in the case of Ukraine, that's a particularly important issue, because the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine and also UNESCO, which we work with, has made an emphasis on the fact that we should also try to work with artists there. And we had been doing this already before. So what we're doing is building infrastructure inside Ukraine. And just like that, we're also building infrastructure within, like, let's say, an area of Africa where artists can move in a regional way. It's an internally kind of displaced situation where they can still be part of the struggle to fight the forces which are persecuting them. And so we work with the Ukraine Emergency Art Fund, and we're hoping to also be working with the MOCA of Ukraine, which is the new Museum of Contemporary Art, and so on. But in the meantime, we have this UNESCO cooperation. I hope you see our screen. We have this beautiful new website that we've created with UNESCO, which I think will give you an idea of the type of residents that we were able to receive. It's almost, in this case, all women, because men are obliged to go to military service if they're of military age. And here you can read about some of their stories, watch some videos, see photos of their work. I think it's quite a good representation of the kind of thing we've done in the case of Ukraine. So I think that's kind of sums it up from our part. If you want to know a little bit more from us, the directors of Artists at Risk, please do ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ivor and Marita, and thanks for pointing out that there is a possibility of questions. So at the moment, we are receiving questions through the YouTube chat. So if there's any of the people who are watching the streaming now and would like to ask direct questions, we will have a space to answer questions from the public at the end. Now I would like to introduce Phil Barton, who's the chair of Sustainability First, and we have invited him to give an opinion from an environmental perspective and to tell us a bit about what they're doing to tackle climate change.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I'm speaking to you from Manchester in the United Kingdom, which is my home. I'm speaking to you really with two hats on, because as well as being the chair of Sustainability First, I'm also an environmental artist and have been concerned throughout my working life, firstly working for NGOs and other organizations, and latterly as an artist, about the cliff edge that we've been hurtling towards ever since I first became aware in the early 1970s of what would happen if we continued to burn fossil fuels. So Sustainability First is a small charity and think tank based in London, and we work on the regulation of utility companies, particularly in energy and water, and we work to try and ensure that as far as possible, and certainly much better than currently happens in the United Kingdom, that utilities are required to take equity and justice and fairness seriously within their plans and regulations and financing of utilities. And that fairness and equity, we believe, applies equally to consumers of the utilities who are dependent on their services, and many of whom are in very significant economic challenging circumstances, but also it applies to the other than human who are dependent on the land and the activities of the energy and water companies. So we are interested both in human equity and in environmental and biodiversity equity. And we do it really through two mechanisms. The first is we work extensively with government and regulators and the companies themselves in order to try and ensure, firstly, they're aware of the issues, and secondly, that there is an ongoing constructive dialogue about the needs. And we collect evidence from consumers, we collect evidence from our work, and we use that to campaign for better regulation, better laws, better controls of the utility companies. And the second arm of our work is we actually look to reach out to consumers and those who are in challenging circumstances, and particularly as well young consumers of the energy and water. We engage with them, we seek to gather their views and represent them back to government and back to the companies, but also to support them in understanding better the relationship between the delivery of energy and water and the climate crisis and social disadvantage and injustice. So that's the work we do, and you can find more about our work if you put sustainability first into your search engine. We will come up. And one of the ways we do that outreach work is by encouraging artists and writers to take part in that dialogue. So currently we have a number of residencies with energy companies, mostly along the east coast of England, where they are working with the companies in those areas and also with the communities who are if you like, the hosts of that utilities activities. My own artistic practice very much focuses on art and science and trying to use the creative process to help people to become more aware of and to understand better the consequences of the economic and technological paradigms that we currently work within. I too am a sculptor, but also work heavily in print and in outreach work with communities in order to do that. So the edge for me has been the edge that I could see approaching us and is in now very close to us, that has been on its way for the last 50, 60 years since we began to move past the carrying capacity of this planet and to overexploit, as we are continuing to do. And I just one sort of final point leading into this. I feel very strongly that the United Kingdom, by deciding to leave the European Union, has opened the door to fracturing and a new edge opening up. And I think it's probably no coincidence that some of what Putin and Russia have done has followed the United Kingdom weakening the European Union and the European project. And I feel I don't know what I can do about it, but I feel we have a responsibility as a country which we have yet to acknowledge for the actions we've taken over the last 5 or 6 years in that particular. And I think all of us have taken the assumption that the stability and prosperity is a right for us all and not something that we have to cherish and look after very carefully. So I look forward to the discussion and hope I can contribute something useful.
Thank you very much, Phil. Now I would like to introduce Boris Krylov. He's one of the 2 Ukrainian members of the Royal Society of Sculptors. Boris is a Ukrainian sculptor whose main body of work consists of monumental sculptures. He graduated from the National Academy of Visual Arts and Architecture in 1999 and became a member of the National Union of Artists of Ukraine in 2009 and the Royal Society of Sculptors in 2010. Boris collaborates with Oles. They both together create many monumental sculptures in Ukraine and other European countries. And his greatest work include a monument to Taras Shevchenko. You'll have to help me pronouncing that, Boris.
Shevchenko.
Thank you. In Irpin in 2017. And a monument dedicated to the warrior of freedom in Kaunas in Lithuania in 2018.
Kaunas, Lithuania.
Thank you. The medium for most of his work over the years has been bronze and stone. So I don't know if you would like to add anything to your introduction, Boris.
Thank you for introduction, Tere. Hello, everyone. It is difficult to say something about today's, but if you want to understand something, you should try to explain that. What is happening in Ukraine now. I'm surprised, but we are working. We are still working. Oles and I are still working like sculptors now, because people and the organization in Ukraine now need for sculpture, and we are asked often, asked for some sculpture, for some sketches, for some ideas to improve our art space in Ukraine now.
So maybe I haven't been clear enough with my introduction, but Boris is connecting at the moment from Kyiv. We were going to have as well Oles connecting tonight, but because with the, I don't know if to call it commemoration or not, because I don't think it's maybe the right word, of the 1 year since the start of the war, there's a belief that there's going to be a big attack from Russia, and so Oles has been called for a special training, military training. So he has prepared a small video for tonight, as he's not going to be able to be. So I'm just going to share screen so that everyone can watch the video.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I want to thank everyone for your help and support. Many thanks to all of organizers of this very important exhibition. The year 2022 changed the view of the world and its security system for Ukrainians and people of the world. When humanity tries to fight for the preservation of ecology, thinks about morality, there is a people in the world who live by the values of prehistoric era, when all issues were decided by the power through which they try to destroy another people. The Russians are getting their way with particular brutality. Such brutality was unimaginable in the 21st century in the center of Europe. They demonstrated the brutality of the bombing of the civilian population, the rape of children, women, the most brutal torture imaginable. And only reason is that we are Ukrainians. With incredible courage, our people are fighting the bloodthirsty plague of the 21st century, sacrificing themselves on the battlefield and at home. Since ancient times, cruelty and treachery during the war played a special role in intimidating the civilian population as the different forces. This exhibition should remind the whole world about the danger that the hands over our entire planet because a nuclear war is capable of destroying all living things. The whole civilized world is able to take decisive step to stop this danger. Otherwise, a global danger cannot be avoided. There is such catch present in the world. When cannot speak, the muses are silent. But I don't think so. I believe that they should be heard. And it is especially important for us as artists to hear their voices. Thank you.
Well, so for us, it has been a very emotional and maybe special, because we somehow feel powerless in the way that we can really support artists in Ukraine. And that's one of the reasons why we set up this exhibition, in order to give a space for the members of our society, and also to people like Marita and Ivor, or the work that also Phil is doing, to show what different organizations and people are trying to do to tackle all these situations that are taking us to live in this kind of like on the edge stage. And one of the things that has been very beautiful of this process is that Boris and Oles have prepared 2 sculptures. Ole's sculpture has even a piece of a Russian missile incorporated on the piece. And we were having a big problem about how are we going to bring these sculptures to London. And so the sculptures have been brought in a diplomatic bag with the support of the Embassy of Ukraine, and they're going to be part of the exhibition. So I think that they might be like small sculptures, but it's just like the whole energy behind in gathering as a group of trying to show this and giving more visibility. We do strongly believe that we'll make this a historical exhibition. And having said that, and now going to our panel, I would like to start asking Marita and Ivor. So what does the concept on the edge mean to you as an organization?
I think that's just a question we are kind of facing. It is on the daily basis. Of course, we work with artists at risk who are living on the edge, literally, from different regions. Like as we speak, we are relocating several artists from different parts of Kurdistan who are facing, it's basically death threats, who are facing prison sentences. We are relocating several Ukrainian artists at the moment as we speak. We are relocating artists from Iran, dissidents, actually now, today we have been working with LGBTQI activists from Kenya who can't play their music in public. They can be sentenced to prison. It's up to 9 years for being LGBTQI activists in public. It's a lesbian couple. So I think that's one clear kind of issues that people are kind of risking their lives for being artists in many parts of the world. And of course, in Ukraine, artists and people are just at risk for being in Ukraine because there's a war in Ukraine. So that's something that we are working with. It's on the daily basis, and maybe just to broaden the discussion also, since Phil gave the presentation, that actually we are also developing a program for cultural workers who are ecological defenders. And we already have been hosting some frontline ecological defenders who are cultural workers, because of course we know that that's one group of the people who are also literally living on the edge and being murdered. It's like in high numbers in many regions.
So following up about what you've mentioned about like people living on the edge, I guess it's a very human thing, but we tend to feel that a limit situation is only when we get to like the extreme situations, like a war, an earthquake, or a natural disaster. And sometimes when it's an edge situation, but that goes in a kind of like slower, it progresses slowly, we kind of like tend to not see how it's really impacting. So following up that, I would like to ask Phil, what happens when attempting to sustain economies in an eco-friendly way? Is there an edge that divides the two worlds?
I think it's a huge challenge because so much that has been happening environmentally, so much that's been happening economically has, on the one hand, been a long way away from people. So they don't see it happening. There's a lack of awareness. And on the other hand, you've actually got sort of a society which has bought in, certainly in the West, and I think it's increasingly impacted elsewhere, into this sort of consumerist expectation of a standard of living and a standard of life, and the need to continue to improve, whilst totally failing to tackle issues of social justice, and that applies within Western countries as well as between the West and the rest of the world. And I think that one of the big challenges we find it at Sustainably First, I find it personally have found it in my life, is how as individuals or as a small organization you can do most to try and have an impact, or at least to be listened to amongst the sort of all the noise that is going on. I think one of the things that has happened over the last few years is, first of all, that the climate change has started to become visible, in that the disrupted weather patterns are now affecting almost every part of the world. And there's rarely a time at the moment where some records are being set of the wrong sort, whether it's for temperature or rainfall or drought or whatever. And that is affecting the West as much as it is affecting other parts of the world. And I think whilst the impacts on Africa, for example, are going to be more extreme more quickly, the fact that actually the United States and the United Kingdom and the European Union are having to deal with these issues does somewhat change the game, just as having a war right on the borders of the European Union and within Europe has changed a different sort of game. So I think we are in a period of flux, and I think the challenge we all have now is how we can use that flux to influence the future direction of challenge. And I don't know if it was the same in other parts of the world, but certainly whilst we were all locked down for COVID, which is another environmental climate change related, economic related disruption, everybody was talking about building back better, and there was a big will to try and see a different sort of society emerge. As soon as we emerged from it, everything went back to business as usual. And I think that's the real challenge that we all have. But the fact that we have these huge disruptions is, I think, is an opportunity as well as an enormous challenge.
Thank you, Phil. Something that I thought was very interesting, and I guess it can somehow connect to maybe like the daily life of everyone who is listening, that I've seen that Emma and Nicola have been posting questions that we will address in a while, was the fact that you were speaking about how to make an impact when you're working with small institutions, and what can you do from your own perspective. And I think that a key factor to be able to push change is to keep being creative. So I would like to ask Boris, how do you keep creative when living at the edge?
Maybe the same like everyone lives in Ukraine now. Everyone have to continue to work and to do their job, to support themselves, to support families, friends, and to help army. It is the main condition. Especially, no, what about artists? I think the artists now have a lot of experiences and experiences and experiences, and these experiences are so strong that new ideas for sculpture came every day. Often when I'm talking to people who went through
went through more than I have.
Who have went through more than I did, and have more difficult experience. Sometimes I imagine ideas for new sculpture, and I'm writing down every day new ideas, make new sketches for future sculptures. And I think, oh, I have a small conspect. May I read it? Excuse me.
Well, and
I will continue. I will go on.
So, but continuing with this idea of like, what can you do in your daily life? And I know that Phil has the opportunity to work with lots of communities around the UK. I would like to ask Phil, like, how do people keep their spirit in their daily lives when living at the edge? And not necessarily both from an environmental point of view, but also like from maybe, which is your opinion of how you are seeing the management of the war?
Yeah, it's clearly a challenge, but I think there are various things that do help. One is, as Boris was just saying, is to keep going, use the experiences creatively. Use them to make you angry if that's helpful. Use them to make you determined if that's helpful. I think what we find is that when we're dealing with some of the companies who when we're going back to sort of utilities and how they behave, when you're working with some of them, actually bringing them face to face with some of the consequences of what their actions are doing. So we do quite a lot of facilitated interactions between the management and the leadership and the staff of some of the utilities through artistic engagement with some of the realities that are going on around them, and that helps to break down barriers and helps to try and get people to see things not from where they're sitting in a boardroom or in a power station, but actually to see them from outside and look in. And personally, that's the reason that I, after 35 years working in NGOs and environmental organizations, are doing lots and lots of fantastic projects and good work, but actually failing to change the economic paradigm within which we're working, that I turn to creativity as a way of doing that. And I do find that, in workshops, in taking my artwork out into public places, one can have dialogues in a totally different way to if you're within the constraints of the organization or the home that you're in. So I think there are the role of artists as facilitators and enablers, as well as inspirers and creators. It can be really important. Not every artist is going to want to do that, but I do think where they're able to, that's an enormously powerful way of working.
So I like the idea that you were saying about like breaking paradigms and making and somehow presenting like different realities. And I think that war brings out the worst side of human beings, but ironically, at the same time, it allows the greatest expressions of human compassion and solidarity. And I'm sure that in Artists at Risk, they have experiences. So I would like to ask Ivor or Marita, which has been the most moving manifestation of solidarity that you have experienced since the war in Ukraine has begun?
Okay, yeah. I think I just before I get to that, I'd like to go back a few steps. I think Boris wanted to actually read a text, but we'll hopefully have a chance to hear what he wanted to say. I wanted to answer the question on the edge. So I mean, it's quite an interesting coincidence that actually the name Ukraine actually comes to some extent etymologically from the concept of the edge. Krai, it means like the edge, krayu in Ukrainian, right? And so it's one of the places which in this world, which is like really on the interface between two different very, rather different systems or empires or structures that are in clashing kind of coexistence with one another. And so it's been a borderland, which is another name for that, which a lot of blood has been poured on for many centuries. Not the first time that war has been seen on those lands. And so what we see this in other countries too. There are certain kind of interfaces which are the most friction occurs, right? Where there's two different civilizations that are kind of in competition or rubbing against each other. And I think we could use this in a very fruitful and productive way. And there's a good way of trying to understand this concept in positive ways, as you were saying, but it often comes in the most negative forms as a form of war. But I think that in terms of ecological work, I mean, if we're going to really just do this kind of a free association as this discussion has developed, I think that we can talk about the edge as the tipping point. And I think we should remind ourselves that the tipping point is when, it's no longer gradual increase in certain kinds of forms of, like temperature. But then suddenly, the ice cup breaks apart, the ice melts, the seas rise, the Gulf Stream stops, an ice age hits Europe, for example, right? So it's a tipping point after which the entire system doesn't look the same ever again. It just changes everything. And I think this is the kind of very, 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 incredibly intense, amazing possibility of total disaster we have to be able to put into our minds in order to be able to do something about changing that possibility. And I think in a similar way, yes, we have to understand that, Europe, for example, is in a way geographically positioned that is surrounded by sea on most fronts, except for Ukraine, right? And Finland, actually, where our base is. So the sea is like our wall. We have, thousands of people dying in that sea every year, but we don't have to claim responsibility like the Israelis for their wall or the Americans for their wall, but we have a wall. It's called the Mediterranean. We have it in Melilla, the Spanish enclave in Africa, and so on. So these kind of, border zones, those edges are the places where the most dangerous things can happen. And we can see the most tragic and perhaps also the most heroic attempts to overcome those borders and make them kind of grow together in a peaceful way. That's something we see in certain residents that come to Artists at Risk, which find a way to reconnect and rebuild their societies without saying we're going to destroy the enemy, but saying, well, the enemy might have been totally the aggressor or they're wrong, but we won't actually win by making them lose. We will only win by all winning together. And that's what we need to do to overcome war. It's not by only defeating the enemy, but by having the enemy not want to have war, right? And so I think in a way Europe, in the post-Cold War era, failed to incorporate Russia in a proper way into the international system and kept it outside. And by that, created the inevitability that it would then have to find its own, empire again. And this is what we see today. So I'm not saying it's equal, but I'm saying we haven't learned from that mistake. And we need to learn from these tipping points to not make them clash, but to overcome them in a positive way. And that's the challenge we face today too.
Well, I wonder if like having a kind of like Plan Marshall after the fall of the Soviet Union would have helped in a way of avoiding a situation like the one we have now. But I think it's difficult to go back in time, and we have to see what we can do in the future. And speaking about this idea of being at the tipping point, and because it also relates to the piece that you have sent to London, and Boris, I would like to, I know that I think you have a text you would like to read, but I also want to ask you, like, how can violence suppress identity?
Oh, that is the story of Ukraine, because Ukrainian culture was pressed by Russia many years, 300 years, and only now, not 30 years ago when the Soviet Union was collapsed, but now we have a chance to make a new Ukrainian art, Ukrainian culture, and that is what artists, I mean poets, actors, singers, sculptors have to do now. I wanted to say that this experience we have now, we can use after the war, after this war. All Ukrainian monuments we had before Soviet Union collapses, dedicated not Ukrainian heroic, Soviet, but Soviet heroic. Many of them are destroyed now, and we try to replace it with Ukrainian art. But there were many people who didn't understand that. They lived, they were born in Soviet Union, and they lived like Soviet people, even now. But now this situation is changing very quickly, very quickly, and we should use this chance. And that is why Ales and I we're doing that all our art life. More than 20 years ago, we began to work together, and all our sculpture dedicated Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian heroic, politic, historical, heroic heroes, personals. And every new day born new and new topic for art. And now process of making art saves artists and saves artists, but result of this process saves society. Society need arts now, and now in Ukraine we see it. It is difficult to explain why, and I don't know how to explain, and I even don't know what we are doing, because because a process of war continue. The war didn't finish, and no one knows when this war finish, and only after the war we will be able to think about this today's events and analyze it, and today it is difficult to make plans for today. We live only for tomorrow. We live only for today. We want to do something tomorrow, but we don't know if what we'll do tomorrow.
But I guess I would like to highlight something you said about like the importance of art, and I know sometimes this might sound a bit old-fashioned, and some of the contemporary art critics might disagree with me, but I do think that art has the power to make images or sculptures that are witness of our times, so that then we can remember what actually happened and we don't over-repeat history. But then also it's a possibility of bringing beauty. And especially when you're going through really difficult moments in life, having hope and seeing something beautiful is something that keeps you working every day, even though, as you might say, you don't really know what's going to happen tomorrow. And this is the last question before we address the questions of the chat. But I think it's interesting what you were saying about like the cultural identities. And somehow we think in a globalized world, it's difficult to somehow, how do we like embrace a globalized world without losing our own identities? And I think this is one of the big challenges of the 21st century. And it does generate lots of like political conflicts, not only the war in Ukraine. And we somehow see this as something that's somehow disconnected to the climate crisis. And some of the discussions we've been having all the years, like trying to divide artists that are working with climate change and divide artists that are working with the war. But I think that there are things that really do come in together. So then I would like to ask Phil, like, how does the energy crisis produced by the war is going to impact on our goal of reducing carbon emissions? And how do you think that somehow the war relates to climate change and to identity crisis?
Well, I mean, just like Boris can't think for tomorrow, I think on a lot of this stuff, none of us think, you know. So in terms of the energy crisis, what has happened has all been short term in terms of European countries, you know, restarting their old power stations, actually, and sort of looking for alternatives from other parts of the world. And the serious planning for change, I still don't see happening in the fundamental way it needs to. And going back to the point about tipping points, I mean, the sea around Europe is a sort of wall around us, but it's also potentially, as it rises, it's going to be a straitjacket on us, and it's going to start to impact. So I think what we have to do is to simultaneously think about the here and now and think about the future. And that, when you're on the edge, is a huge challenge, but it's also an opportunity. The challenge is obviously that the here and now, whether it's the high energy prices, or it's a war, or it's COVID, or it's the fires that are raging, that has to be dealt with. But it has to be dealt with wherever we can, so that the solutions in the short term are taking us in the right direction in the medium to long term. And I think you know, the issue for us with the climate and with ecological, the failure of our ecological life support systems is an existential crisis for humanity, and we seem peculiarly ill-equipped to actually deal with that sort of crisis, but we have to. And I just think new ways of thinking, new ways of tackling things. So you know, the classic, the sort of cliche, that it's better to teach a fisherman how to fish than it is to catch the fish. But soon there won't be fish to catch. So we've got to really sort of try and break through and develop new ways of thinking. And philosophers can do that, but I think artists can do that as well.
So speaking about the idea of the tipping point, I would like to address one of the questions of the chat sent by Barbara Bayer to Artists at Risk. So she's asking, does Artists at Risk ever come under pressure or be threatened by pressure regimes if the places the artists by pressure regimes if the places the artists come from? Off, I would imagine.
Well, I can start answering that. The answer is obviously yes. We have the honor of being now officially on the website of the leader of the Wagner Group's media arm, Prigozhin, who's threatening us directly. We have had visa denials. There are ways in which we feel the heat. Of course, it's nothing like those residents that are in the field and those people that are underground, let's say, in safe houses in Afghanistan. Unbelievable terror and pressure that they're under. And we try to find ways to support them, give them money. Marita was mentioning that we have a second program called Ecologists at Risk, working with ecological defenders. And even the feasibility study for one of the projects we were working on was deemed too dangerous to do, because there are more than, I think it was at the time, 7 ecological defenders being killed a week in South America, which is much higher than even journalists. So those people defending the land, including indigenous people mainly, and that's probably, the statistics are not even covering many of them because they don't have access to the media, are horrendous. So the statistics are really bad, and we feel that we have an obligation to put our necks on the line just like they did, and that's where we come from. We're from the field, so we're not really an NGO that came from outside, but part of the struggle. Yeah.
So then also Emma Elliott is adding to this question. I can imagine you must feel like a lifeline for artists living in oppressed countries. How do you promote your work to these artists at risk so that they can find you?
Go ahead.
So basically, it's kind of Artists at Risk has an ongoing public call on our website, but often it's a snowball effect that, like we have from Afghanistan, on more than 1,500 applications, which means that it's basically artists, they start to find out about us and our work. It's saying that it's basically when we start to host artists from, for example, many Kurdish artists. So it's kind of also basically people spread the word to each other. From Ukraine, we have more than 2,000 applicants and so on. Of course, we can't reach out everybody. That's always a challenge in the regions where it's difficult to access internet and so on. But we go through our peer organizations and human rights organizations, artist organizations. The way certainly is not to have an ad in e-flux. It's kind of other channels. It's often peer channels, how the word it travels.
And I guess that like opening up channels not only happens through like organizations, but also can happen like from the everyday's life. So I would like to ask Phil to answer Julie Brixie Williams' question. So she's saying, I believe strongly in the value of the small act. I wonder if in the panel could speak from their experiences to outline the best ways to make our artistic small acts really count.
I think 2 or 3 examples that I could give. I mean, one of them, working here in our community in Russia, I've been campaigning for urban trees, which are not valued. They're seen as a problem for developers, and they're seen as a problem for the council. And we have had a campaign running where we have been encouraging local groups and individuals, residents, to plant trees and to look after them. And initially we set ourselves a target of 47 trees. We're just getting near to completing the second phase, which is 470 trees, and we're looking to 4,700 in the next phase. And on its own, that's limited value, but it means that there's a whole lot of people living in this community who have actually planted a tree themselves, that they've and because we've had the droughts recently, there's a need to look after them afterwards. And then as they start to grow, they start to impact on the landscape, and they start to do the things that trees do in terms of helping to manage, reduce drainage and flooding, helping to create, to tackle carbon dioxide, and so on. And I think, you know, if you take the first, you know, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And I think, you know, creative approaches to actually taking action, to doing something. Talking is important, but doing is the flip side of talking. And there are 2 or 3 other examples. We have a waste and recycling project running locally, where local people themselves educate the students. We're a student area. They come in, educate the students about how they can better reduce and reuse what they do, and then ensure that it's recycled properly, and that's growing, and so on. So I think there are things that can be done, and it is important not to get overwhelmed by the scale of the problem, but to actually start to do it.
So I hope that the people who are connected at the panel at the moment don't mind that we're going to extend 15 minutes more to be able to address all of the questions in the chat. And speaking about action, there's some questions to Boris. So Nicola Anthony is asking, Boris, could you tell us about your work in On the Edge exhibition and how that has come from your experiences?
I will try. I know how bad my English is, but I will try. This story of this sculpture began 8 years ago, 7 years ago, when the very first veterans from this war came back from the front line. And we thought what to do. They wanted to make some sculpture, some monument dedicated to this event. But when I asked them what we are making, at that moment we had not victory, and we didn't lose. And it was too early to make a sculpture dedicated to killed, died people, because new soldiers went to the front line, and it would be not right to make sculpture for died people when but I began to work, and Ales and we had made a few dozen of sketches, and but no one of them was realized until now. And recently I met one of these veterans, and I asked him the same question: what do you want to do now? And he said, I think it would be this sculpture would be decided to resistance, because this war is resistance, and all Ukrainian history is resistance against Russia. And like mask cover is covering face, Russia wanted to cover Ukraine's culture, but we didn't. But we don't want, and we are not allowed. We don't allow to do that. And this resistance, that is what the sculpture dedicated. Is shortly. That is a short description. And this sculpture made from bronze and steel. And now we are planning to install this sculpture in Kiev or in some place in Europe. Now we have not a place to install it, but I think we will do it. We will do it.
And well, I was just recently sharing an image of Boris' sculpture of resistance that will be part of the show. And there are 2 people in the chat, Emma, Elliot, and Julie Pixie Williams asking if you could read the text you wanted to read before. And also Emma is saying, also I'm curious if you're still finding ways to put on group shows and exhibit in Kyiv.
It is a short text. I want to help myself and to remember everything I wrote it down. During the first days of war, I didn't really think about art at all. After a few weeks, when I settled in a new place and dealt with all the mundane problems, I started talking to other people, to other artists from abroad. That communication helped a lot during those days, because to tell someone about this situation, I first had to analyze it myself and come to some sort of conclusion. A few months later, some customers started coming in with the creative tasks. So we, Aless and I, even managed to get some sculptures done. I personally think that if I am not in the army now, I have to continue doing my job. An artist needs experience for inspiration. During these tough times, we all get more than enough. We all have more than enough experiences. I try to write down the ideas for future sculptures because it is impossible to memorize everything. Often, when I am talking to someone who has went through more than I have, ideas for sculptures just start popping up in my head. I can make an analogy. It is like a poet often thinks in rhymes. A sculptor thinks in shapes and volumes, not words, without words. Besides from that, after Soviet Union collapsed, many Soviet sculptures were left standing here in Ukraine. They all need to be replaced with new Ukrainian culture. I hope that with my work that I am creating now, I am helping build the foundation for the next era of Ukrainian culture. Now, the whole world is watching Ukraine, and I really hope that people will not only see the war, but also the many talented artists we have here. Those people are creating the face of the Ukrainian nation, Ukrainian art and Ukrainian culture. That is why I am really grateful that Royal Society of Sculptors decided to organize this exhibition, and even more grateful for the opportunity to participate in it. That is what I think.
It's a very beautiful text. And we would like to know if, like in the art field nowadays in Kyiv, are people like exhibiting, or is it like are people not exhibiting anymore? You're having group shows, or?
Yes, there are exhibitions in Kyiv now. Not many, but we have. And some my friends invite me time after time. And we have now we have concerts. I know, have exhibitions. The cultural life is in Kyiv, in Ukraine in general.
Well, so to just, I interrupted you, Boris. Was there something you wanted to say that you haven't said yet?
I wanted to say again that process of sculpture saves an artist, but the result of this process saves society. That is what I want to say.
Oh, thank you so much. I think that the whole group is really like, we all feel grateful and honored that you have taken time to be part of the show in this very difficult times. I'm seeing some people adding things in the chat. And I guess what you've said as the last question for tonight. that I would like each of the speakers to answer in a very short or summarized way. So, why is sculpture relevant when we face increased ecological and human loss? I don't know if you would like to start, Ivor and Marita.
So the question was that why is sculpture important? I didn't catch the rest of the question. I'm sorry. Can you repeat it, Terja?
Yes, so why is sculpture relevant when we face increased ecological and human loss?
I think it's sculpture and art in general. I wouldn't kind of just make a differentiation. It's important, as we have talked today, that it's artists keep on creating in these kind of situations, and it's often artists who are on the front line of making many things visible first. So whether it's sculpture, whether it's poetry, whether it's music, whether it's theater, and that's what we also witness at the moment in Ukraine. Actually, I just met with somebody from Ukrainian Cultural Foundation, and he repeated that the people are going to see new films, theater plays, and so on in the middle of the war. They go to the bomb shelters in between and so on. And I think it's the same when it comes to ecological issues, that I think artists have big potential also making visible what is happening, and they are also using arts and culture in defending ecological issues and risking their lives, literally, by doing so. Same for the human rights generally. So it's not only sculpture, it's all forms of art at the moment.
Thank you, Marita. Also, Emma Elliott is asking if they can buy directly from your website art to support artists at risk, or if you have a special platform.
We have a link on our website. So if you go on our website, there's a shop.
We actually, I would recommend waiting a little bit, because we're going to relaunch the shop in the next month or so. And that will have many new artists, and also I think it could be a small problem right now, technical issues, so just wait a little. But we have fundraisers for different parts of the work we do. Of course, the aspect of residencies is the most expensive. It's just caring for the entire life of an artist. But are we still with you? Yes. It seems the sound might have broken off. Do you still hear me? Yes, but we do also have something called the Artists at Risk Production Fund, which is very important in supporting artists who are in our residencies but don't have funds to produce art, to make new creations. And we want to make sure the artists in our programs never have this choice between life and art, that they actually continue as artists when they're in artist risk safe havens. And I think it's very important to continue to work with artists as artists rather than just as refugees or as, asylum seekers and all the other legal statuses they might have, but rather to have them be able to continue as artists, because their work is powerful and expression is important. I think Terja dropped out of the conversation. Do you want to continue, Boris, from there?
Sorry, I had a bit of a technical issue. My computer went down. I'm glad that the panel didn't cut. Continue on, please. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we were continuing about that issue, so maybe somebody would like to add something.
Yeah. I'd agree that the issue is not just about sculpture, it's about creativity and art much more widely than that. But why is it important? It's important, I think somebody said earlier on, artists have the ability to reinterpret the world, but whether it's the human world or the more than human world, to bring beauty and inspiration into people's lives. They have the ability to inform and make visible that which is invisible, and they have the ability to introduce new ideas and new thinking and to reflect back to people sort of some of the important issues that are facing us. So for me, the creative process happens through artists, but it also happens through communities of people and people coming together to campaign and to raise issues and to tackle problems. And so it's a fundamental importance to us as we go forward, however sharp and difficult the edge may be.
Thank you, Phil. I would like to know if Boris would like to add any answer to this question. Why is sculpture or art relevant when we face increased ecological and human loss?
I can say it's a sculptor. I think the sculpture, the art and the sculpture is important in every time, because sculpture will live much longer than we will live, longer than books, movies, even longer than internet, and that is the reason why, I think.
So I wanted to thank everyone for coming to this panel tonight, also for the organizations that have been helping us during this process of setting up the exhibition. So Artists at Risk, Sustainability First, well, Boris and Oles, the other 26 sculptors that I know that some of them have been listening to the panel, Espacio Gallery, the Royal Society of Sculptors, Arboleda Wine as well, and the Embassy of Ukraine for bringing Boris and Oles sculpture. I don't know, I hope I'm not missing any institution. And to summarize, I think that sculpture is relevant. I mean, we've all said it, but one, I think it's because it's something, as Marita was saying, that shows things, or creativity, not only sculpture, but it somehow presents realities before they happen, or shows a different perspective from things, and widens up our conversation and the capacity of also solving problems. I think there's a relevance in terms of like how people fight and use art as a form of tackling different issues that has maybe been brought by Phil. And I would also agree with Boris that it's something that will remain permanent and beyond from us. And maybe to summarize as well, from my perspective, I think that it gives us hope that there's still beauty in human existence. So having said that, even though On the Edge is an exhibition that like private views and launch events tend to be like moments to gather and moments to celebrate, we're not really sure if this is a moment to gather or to celebrate, because we're actually bringing topics that are very difficult topics to discuss. But I hope that the viewers to this panel help come to the exhibition and join our discussion, and that something comes up from this, and also to give more visibility to amazing people and organizations like Boris and Oles, Artists at Risk, and Sustainability First. So I hope to see everyone at the Espacio Gallery, and thank you for everything. And have a good evening. So bye-bye.
Thank you for the panel. Have a good exhibition.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.